Okay, if I can just bring the room to order, please. It's Tuesday, the 20th of July, 10:30. If I can request mobile phones to silent, please. This is the Finance, Economic Development, Corporate Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee. As per the agenda, are there any comments from members of the public?
There are none, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies for absence received from Councillor Bob Adams, apologies received from Councillor John Dawson, and Councillor Jackie Smith will be acting as substitute for this meeting. Apologies for absence received from Councillor Phil Dilks, with Councillor Ashley Baxter acting as his substitute for this meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and I'm grateful for those councillors stepping in, Councillor Jackie Smith and Councillor Ashley Baxter. Thank you for stepping in. Are there any disclosures of interest? Any disclosures of interest in the room? As a reminder, you can disclose interests at any stage. Moving on, item 4, action notes of the meeting held on the 29th of June. Are there any comments on the action notes of the minutes held of the meeting of the 29th of June? Okay, if there are no comments, can I have a proposer that that's an accurate record? Thank you, Councillor Ian Stokes.
Record of them.
And a seconder? Well, Councillor Mark Whittington. All those in favour that this is a true and accurate record? Any against? No against. Any abstentions? There are 2 abstentions, so that is carried as a Councillor Baxter.
Sorry, do we need to vote on those minutes, on those action notes, because they're not minutes?
But they're not minutes, but it's a detail of the actions that came out of that meeting. So we felt it was sensible to have a vote on those that being the only actions. I
just wondered if it was procedurally correct, but I bow to your judgment.
Okay, I'm grateful for the comments. So updates from previous meeting, going through to the updates from the action sheet. Are there any comments? Councillor Adam Stokes.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. If we look at action number 6, I will be looking to come with Section 151 officer to the next Bourne Town Council full council meeting to have a discussion regarding the SEA. I think the next one's on the 31st of July, 31st of August even. So we'll be looking to have that discussion with not only district councillors, but also the town council regarding the SEA.
Any other comments? Councillor Mark Whittington.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In terms of action note 10, which is the Chair and Vice Chairman discuss the scoping and report on asset management review and cost savings. I had a brief discussion with the Chief Executive on Thursday regarding this, and I know there's some work going on locally around all of this, but it's a bit too early at the moment for any sort of definitive reports. But I think we'll be in a position for officers to potentially bring something to this committee sometime during the autumn, if that's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So just to confirm, this is part of a wider piece of work. That wider piece of work from the Cabinet will report in advance of our autumn meetings to allow us to take a more detailed report then. Is that right, Councillor Whittington?
Yes, that's my understanding. If officers have got any additional comments on that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, are there any other?
I know, just to confirm that timescale should be achievable.
Thank you for that. Are there any other comments in the room about the updates from the previous meeting? Okay, I'd like to make some progress. So if we can move on then, please, to the Local Council Tax Support Scheme. This is in the hands of Councillor Adam Stokes. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'll introduce and then I'll pass to Claire like last time. So obviously we brought at the previous FEDCO meeting a report. The officers have gone away and done some work on the basis of what was said at that meeting, but I will now hand over to Claire, who will go through the report in more detail.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Stokes. So we have gone away and we have modelled the options that were presented in the meeting of the 29th of June. Those options are set out in paragraph 1.4 of the main report and also in appendix 1, which is shown on page 13 of the report onwards. The options do show that there are some areas that we could amend our scheme that would produce a saving. Those savings are minimal. So option A is an assumption of a council tax increase of 3% and no change to caseload. And the considerations are with all of these that with our caseload, it's a very volatile situation. So at the moment, our caseload is still very high because we still have a number of applicants that are in receipt of council tax support as a direct result of COVID. They're still furloughed, they still have a low income, they still may have lost jobs and not found re-employment. So that caseload level is exceptionally high at the moment, and it's the highest it's been since council tax support was introduced. So option A has two schemes that would provide savings, which are within the appendix, and it's 10A and 20A. Those options are to reduce our maximum award to 70% and to reduce capital to 8,000. Those savings totals are 22,000 for option 10A and for South Kesteven District Council's share of just over £2,000. And for option 20A, which is a reduction in the capital limit, the total saving is just over £6,000, with South Kesteven's share of just under 1,500. The next two modelling scenarios where we increase our caseload don't produce any savings within the scheme. So option D is where we still retain the council tax increase of 3%, but we have a 1% caseload decrease. So for both of the caseload decreases of either a 1% or a 2%, there are various savings that can be realised, and they are shown in the table on page 9. It won't be my intention to go through all of the savings, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions on those in the table on page 9. The option F at the bottom of page 9 is the reduction of the frequency of reassessment of universal credit. This was mentioned in the last meeting. Whilst we can't model this does mean that we won't be issuing 12 bills to people in receipt of universal credit. It will also mean that we are able to get those customers into a recovery cycle much quicker, so we can pick up if they do have arrears quicker in the year and not towards the end of the financial year where they may be out of options for additional support that could be available to them. Option G was to introduce the national schemes. As advised at the last committee, this is where schemes are introduced nationally in the year, which may benefit our customers, but if we were to take into account their income as part of their council tax support scheme, it could have a negative impact. So any scheme that is introduced in the year, we would ignore for our council tax scheme purposes. At the meeting on the 29th of June, we were asked to consider the impact of non-collection to any of these schemes. So paragraph 1.6 references that. At the moment, a council tax bill has a residual amount of 20% because the maximum support available is 80%. And a typical amount based on a band B property is £277.74. So if somebody is in receipt of full council tax support, they have £277.74 to pay for the year. So that's how much we have to collect in the year for that customer. Just moving on to part 2 of the report with regards to consultation. If the decision was taken today that there would be no changes to the scheme, it would be recommended that we do still go out to consultation. Whilst there may be no changes, the scheme does affect all of our council taxpayers, and it does affect those that are in receipt of it at the moment. And as part of the council tax support legislation, there is a requirement that we do consult on our scheme each financial year. That's the introduction of my report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, are there any comments and questions in the room? Councillor Mark Whittington.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. And thank you very much indeed, Claire, and many thanks to your team for doing all of the financial modelling here, because I think it's important for us to actually get an understanding of the figures and the actual numbers. And actually, after reading it, my own particular view is, and I think you mentioned it in your presentation, we're still in quite a volatile situation. We've still got a lot of people locally on furlough, a lot of people who are financially quite vulnerable at the present moment of time. And given the fact that the modelling work has indicated that any savings that we could potentially make are so small. I mean, obviously, you know, we need to give the best faith for pulling money, but the savings are in their nature quite small. And actually, my particular view is, given the volatility out there, and we've still got very, very vulnerable people out in our community. Certainly, I've got no inclination myself to want to change this scheme. And actually, I think that certainly my view is that we should allow the status quo to continue, not to make any changes at this stage, but to potentially look at this in another year's time and go out to consultation on the basis that we'll have no changes to the scheme. But that's just my own personal view on that. But again, Claire, many, many thanks to your team for doing the work. Because I think it's important for us to understand the numbers, and I think both the report and the attached spreadsheet does give us that crucial information. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Councillor Morgan. Microphone.
First of all, thank you very much for all the work that's gone into this. It's like looking into a crystal ball, I imagine, just trying to guess what might happen. If I just look at your option G for a moment, we said that we won't take into account any national schemes introduced during a financial year. And this sounds like a really idiot question, but what happens if the change could actually benefit the persons concerned who are in need of the scheme?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chairman. That's a really important point, and I think that needs to have an amendment in that report. Any positive change that could impact the customer, we are notified through Secretary of State to make that change within our council tax scheme. So this really is, if there is a negative, it could create a negative impact for the customer, that we wouldn't take that into account. So I will alter that option to make that clearer.
Thank you very much. I have another question, if I may.
Councillor Morgan, yep.
Thank you. We are aware, unfortunately, that although there's been a lot of lobbying of the government, at the moment they haven't responded to requests not to reduce the support in autumn for the people who are on benefits affected by COVID. How do we envisage that impacting, and have we taken that into account?
Claire.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chairman. I'm making a slight assumption that this is with regards to the universal credit changes that are coming into effect, where they lose the £20. With that, if there is a reduction in their universal credit, then there would be an increase in their council tax support because they've got less income coming into the household. And again, I think that just shows the volatility that we're working with, because at the moment that decision hasn't been made. So we're working on the basis that for everybody in receipt of that £20 will continue to be in receipt of it. So if it doesn't go through, then yes, potentially we could see a slight increase in our scheme. But for our customers, it will mean that where they lose £20 in universal credit, they won't get £20 in council tax support. It'll be around £12.50 in council tax support.
Thank you. I'm wondering if it's possible to reflect that, given at the moment that's looking like the likelihood of that could be somehow captured in the report.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I think that's a fair comment, and I think, again, with it reflecting that volatility, I'm happy to add something in the report to advise of that.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Philip Knowles.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a query on one of the numbers. We go to page 9, and E, council tax, section E. And then going down the scheme, number 6, the capital limit is reduced to £10,000 and the total saving is 73,000. E, number 7, if they reduce the capital limit to 9,000, then the total saving is only £559,000, which doesn't seem quite right. But reduced capital limit of £8,000, which is number 8, the total saving is 164,000. Surely 7, reducing the capital limit to 9,000 should give us a saving somewhere between 6 and 8. Is that not common sense? Is that not right?
Claire?
Through you, Chair, you're absolutely right, Councillor. If I could just have a couple of minutes to have a look at that modelling, and I will be able to respond to that query.
Thank you.
Okay, fair enough. But we can update on the correct number there. But the observation is correct that number is somewhere between 73 and 164 for it to be more. Thank you for that. Are there any other comments in the room? Councillor Ian Stokes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, having thought about this, I'm in agreement with Mark that it seems so small that we're going to benefit that we should leave well alone. And I'd like to second that motion if that was the case.
Thank you. Are there any other comments in the room? I have a couple of comments. I agree with the comments from Councillor Ian Stokes and Councillor Mark Whittington. I think the summary of this report is that 90% of the benefit is with somebody else and 100% of the grief lies with us. So I can kind of understand why we're not really motivated to do anything on here. And I'd be happy to support that motion. I presume conversations must be had with LCC to say, look, if you want us to change this, you need to pay us to accept some of that grief. How are those conversations had, and is there any response, or are they just not minded to get involved? Claire?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As part of consultation, we do go to Lincolnshire County Council and also to the Police and Crime Commissioner to advise of the changes that are taking place. There are no conversations with regards to the administration of such a scheme. The scheme does sit with the local authority. It is something that is within our remit to have to undertake. So there is, as I say, there's no conversation with reimbursement of administration. The cost of the scheme is shared between us, the precepts, the PCC and Lincolnshire County Council as part of the council tax setting process.
But just to confirm, you're confirming that they are part of the consultation and they can have, obviously this is all in the public domain now, they can access those numbers and have conversations should they wish. But just one final comment upon what you said. You mentioned the volatility of the caseload is highly volatile at the moment. And you said that caseloads are changing by up to 2%. That doesn't strike me as highly volatile. Can you put some metrics around that as to what caseload is and where it's come from, and the fact that going above 2% is highly unlikely?
Thank you, Chairman. I can. The metrics, the detailed metrics were included in the report that came to the committee on the 29th of June. So that has got the total figures in there. Our total figures for council tax support are sitting at around 8,655 at the moment. Of those figures, we're not able to change a scheme for anybody that's classed as a pensioner, and we're not able to change the scheme for anybody that's classed as vulnerable. So there's only a small percentage of that working age scheme, where we can change for working age people. So whilst 2% isn't a significant amount, it's 2% of a smaller amount of the total of the caseload. And some of that caseload could potentially move into a pensioner scheme or a vulnerable scheme within the year. So the cost of any change actually impacts fewer of our customers throughout the year as the year continues.
Okay, fine. Thank you for that clarification. Are there any other questions in the room? Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make sure I'm understanding what's in front of me. we're saying, what we're talking about is how much, what the financial impact is of squeezing or loosening the benefit that we give to some of the poorest and most vulnerable households in the district. And if we were to go 70%, then we might squeeze out of those 8,000 households. Was it 8,000 households? I think it was 8,000 households.
Claire?
Our working age caseload is around 2,500. So it's that caseload that would be impacted.
So 2,500 households, but we already know are financially struggling. We might be able to squeeze £2,000 if we played about with the scheme. Obviously, we could go the other way. Yes, if that's what I've understood, then yes, we're focusing our attention on the wrong end of the scale. And I would agree, either don't mess about with it at all and leave it at the 80%, or make it more generous to those vulnerable households. So I'd happily go along with the proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan.
Actually, Councillor Baxter slightly touched on what I was going to say, that we need to be careful about what we're saying in the sense of who benefits, because obviously we are representing our communities, many of whom are really, really struggling at the moment, and they benefit from this. And therefore, whilst, yes, I appreciate it's an admin cost and overhead for us, at the end of the day, I don't consider that to be a negative thing, that we are supporting those people in some way. And I was going to ask the question if there's the option on the table to increase the amount.
Claire?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor. There are options. The options are included within Appendix A. So, for example, on page 13, our current scheme is at 80%, which is 8A. So if we wanted to include increase the maximum award, just say to 85%, if you go across to the fifth column, the increase to the scheme would be £218,887. When we increase or make the scheme more generous, we make it more generous for everybody. So not just our vulnerable customers, but it is everybody. So the more we wanted to increase our maximum award, the more that it would go up. So you'd be looking between 218,000 or 3A, which is 709,000. So that would be an additional cost to the budget.
Thank you. I would urge Councillor Baxter and Councillor Morgan to look at the reports from the last. This is a follow-up report from the last meeting, where the last meeting, our scheme was presented in relation to all the schemes in Lincolnshire, to show the most generous and the least generous, and we were somewhere, I think it was fair to say, somewhere in the middle of the scale. So I'd urge you to look at those reports. Councillor Morgan, I'd like to move to the vote, but if you want to make a final point, please.
Actually, I'm glad you said that, because we have, certainly in the Grantham area, and I'm sure there are pockets also across the district, some of the poorest people in the county, if not the country. So if we're somewhere in the middle, that implies that actually we're not perhaps meeting the needs of some of the poorest people in the country who maybe do need to be considering increasing the amount. My concern, though, is that whether it's necessary to increase it for everybody with that in mind. So I was just going to ask back if there is any option to wiggle room within that we can focus at the need, increase the amount for those most in need, perhaps by looking at rules or something like that.
Claire?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chairman. If we were to do that, there would be a quality impact assessment needs that would need to be undertaken, and we would need to determine how we would class a vulnerable person. We do have a vulnerability code within our scheme at the moment, and that's a national vulnerability code. So that includes anybody that might be in receipt of a disability allowance, employment support allowance, personal independence payments, where there is an additional need for that person. But if we did want to look at including a new vulnerability scheme, then there would be a significant piece of work for that to be done for us to determine who we would be classing as vulnerable within our district.
Okay, thank you for that. As I said, we are going through some of the, we're covering some of the ground we covered in the last meeting where we discussed our scheme in association with the other schemes in the county. And I'd urge you to look at those. Councillor David Bellamy.
No, that's the question I was just going to ask, actually. Is it possible for Claire to tell us how ours reflects compared with the other districts in the county?
Claire?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chairman. We're the only council that doesn't have anything other than the 80% maximum award. So every other council within the district has an adjustment for, it really reflects the modelling. So there's some councils that do have a banding cap. So anybody there could be a cap at a band C. So anybody that's in a property that's over a band C, they would only get up to the liability of the band C value of their council tax support. There's some that have reduced the capital limits, and there's also some that do have the minimum weekly entitlement. So all of the other councils within the county have a hybrid of all of the modelling that we've done, and that's why we've done this modelling. Whereas with our scheme, it's purely a maximum award scheme. So our scheme is very simple for our customers to understand.
Councillor Mark Whittington.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Councillor Morgan raised a useful point around the criteria for vulnerability. But I'm getting the impression from what you're saying, Claire, this is a fairly major piece of work and we need a new equality impact assessment. Just wondering, Mr. Chairman, if an approach might be, this review is an annual process. I'm just wondering, Councillor Morgan, if you'd be happy that certainly for the next time, in a year's time, when this comes to the committee, as part of that review process, Claire and her team could go away and do the work around looking at the vulnerability assessment, just to see what flexibility that there may be. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Morgan, do you want to reply to that, please?
Yes, thank you. Yes, well, I was actually going to propose that we did do that work. So I appreciate what your offer, Councillor Whittington. That would certainly be a compromise. My slight concern is we've got people who this autumn are potentially about to face a big hit financially, who are already known to be struggling, and all the charities are telling us they need that money now that they're about to lose. So, and it sounds like this scheme could offer them a significant support going through this period. So if there's any more help we could offer, I guess I would say yes to you, definitely, for the future. But if there is any way we could pull that work forward, then could we do that?
Claire, can you respond?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think what assurances I can give is that we do have the top-up scheme as part of council tax support. So we do have a £30,000 pot of money where if somebody has a shortfall between their council tax support award and their remaining liability for council tax, then we can top that up for them. And it may be that within our scheme from October, those customers can apply for the hardship award. And if they do show that they've got hardship because they've lost that £20 universal credit payment, then we may be able to top up that shortfall for them come October onwards.
Councillor Morgan.
Yeah, in that case, that sounds like it could help. My only suggestion is that we monitor that pot, because it might suddenly get a much bigger hit. And if I suppose it's a question for potentially Councillor Stokes or Richard, whether there's the possibility of adding to that pot if it is deemed necessary.
I think that's a useful observation. We could take a report on that halfway through the year. I'd like to move to the vote. Councillor Baxter, you wanted to make a final point.
Yes, and forgive me, I'm catching up with some of this because I'm substituting A question about the benefit cap. No, it's the banding cap that everybody else in Lincolnshire seems to have, but we don't. Can I ask why historically haven't we done that? Have we been offered it and rejected it as overcomplicating it? That would sound like a reason. But my other question is about you said that if we raise the banding or lower the banding from 80% to 70%, 90%, 95%, whatever, then we would have to do it for everyone. Who do we mean by everyone? Are we talking about everyone that is eligible for the scheme, i.e. pensioners, war widows, whoever, or is it everyone as in everyone in this room, everyone in the district?
Thanks for that, Claire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With regards to the banding cap, we don't actually see any savings if we were to introduce those caps, and until we did the modelling, we weren't aware, but that is because the result is that the majority of our CTS customers are either in a band A or a band B property. There aren't enough in a band C and above for that to make a saving if we were to cap that at that value. And with regards to the everyone, I'll make sure in future meetings I'm a bit more specific. And that is that it's everybody that's currently in receipt of council tax support who are either pensioner or vulnerable. So if we were to make the scheme less available, less generous, thank you very much, then they wouldn't be impacted. But if we make the scheme more generous, then they would be impacted because they are protected by a less generous scheme.
Okay, I'm grateful for that clarification. I'd like to move to the vote. So Councillor Whittington, if you can just clarify what you're proposing today.
Yes, thank you. As I say, in my opening comments, I suggested that we maintain the status quo going forward because of the reasons that Claire outlined, given the fact it's still a volatile situation, and we really shouldn't be penalising people who are already extremely vulnerable to save a few £1,000s. And I think that's the general view of the comments that have been made by the committee. So I think that we should support the recommendation, but I think we need to add to that, which is the point that I made and then Councillor Morgan made, that around the quality impact assessment, around the vulnerability, that I'm not sure if officers can do a form of words, but in effect, as part of the work for next year, the Claire and her team do some work around that to just see what flexibility and what impact it could have around that. But if I think Councillor Morgan wants to come back on that.
Councillor Morgan.
I'd just like to add the debate we had regarding the top-up scheme, that we also consider reviewing that because that's the safety net this year.
I think those 2 points are noted, and I think we can note those as part of the work plan. They don't necessarily need to be part of our vote. They can be part of the work plan, the quality impact assessment, the top-up scheme. I would also like to see next year as well in this report feedback from LCC as to what they said in last year's consultation, because as I say, they're the big beneficiaries or losers in our decision here, but they're part of the work plan. They're all duly noted. But the recommendation is to remain with the status quo. Councillor Ian Stokes, are you happy to second that? Oh. Councillor Morgan.
I'm not happy that we make it part of the work plan in the summary of our conclusion today. We don't know that, as it quite rightly said, we know we're facing a very volatile situation, and I believe it's not the status quo isn't an acceptable position with no recognition of the fact that we may need to make this alteration very quickly. We may be looking in October potentially having to review the figures regarding the top-up scheme. I think it's an important and integral part of a decision today, and not something to be kicked down the line. I think it was a very helpful proposal put forward without us having to do this other complex work now. But I think it's extremely important we are mindful that there are people in our communities for whom this could be absolutely critical, and we could be talking about food on their table if we don't support them as much as we possibly can. And I think status quo isn't acceptable given the current environment. I think that we should include that option, and I don't see why we can't.
Okay, that is duly minuted. Richard, is it realistic to bring the top-up scheme as a report to this committee in October?
I mean, we can definitely, and just perhaps help this. And if members might recall at the last meeting, we talked about the COVID recovery reserve that we'd established, and that went through cabinet last week. And there's a delegation in place for myself, Councillor Stokes, and the chief executive to look across all our budget areas, and if there are pressures which are directly or indirectly caused by the pandemic and the kind of long tail of the implication, then I would suggest that would fall within that definition. So I think Councillor Morgan and other members can be assured that we've heard this, and that will definitely be within our thinking when we look across at any pressures across the authority in the next few months.
But just to confirm, you're happy to bring that as a report back to this committee in October, or a meeting around October. Okay, well, subject to the observations that we've made today that have been duly minuted, all those in favour of continuing the scheme as it stands? Okay, and any against? There are no against, and any abstentions? There are no abstentions. Okay, thank you, committee. Okay, so I'd like to make some progress. The finance update report. This is with Councillor Adam Stokes.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Obviously, this is the finance update report that we started last year at the start of COVID. This report covers April and May. I will hand over now to Richard to go through the report in more detail. Thank you.
Thank you. I just draw members' attention to some highlights within the report. I think the first thing to note is it's an actual position to date for the first 2 months of the year. We don't start forecasting until after Q1, so that work is now underway, and we'll bring back a forecast report at your September meeting, which will cover the first 4 months of the financial year. So this is only actuals rather than any future projections, but perhaps areas to note. The report contains throughout the carry forwards that I think we debated here in June, and subsequently Cabinet approved last Tuesday at their meeting. So those carry forwards are included within this, which obviously does change the budget framework for the General Fund and the HRA from the figures that were approved by Council back in March, as we've carried those carry forwards into the budget framework. We can see in table 2, spend to date for the general fund is at 2.6 million, but we were unable to make any comments as whether within profile that is reflective, but that's a factual position. The key area for us in terms of volatility in the system is still around income, unsurprisingly, because this does capture some of the early part of the restrictions in early April, but also subsequently some of the contained restrictions that are in place during May and the early part of June. So unsurprisingly, you'll see car parks are still under financial pressure. And of course, the car park income had in it the built-in income increase on the back of the tariffs increases that were approved by council. So the budgets themselves were lifted to reflect that increased income driven by those tariffs, but you'll see they're coming under pressure due to the underutilisation of those. And you'll also see markets continue to suffer, as do the arts, because of the restrictions in the opening ability of the centres. We can also confirm that the income compensation scheme does continue for the first quarter only, so that will cover us between April and the end of June. Our indications are we'll be able to recover about 134,000 from that scheme for that period. And the losses will be greater than that. You can already see it's 146, and that's up to the end of May. So if we extrapolate that to the end of June, you'll see we'll be suffering some real losses ourselves, and we won't be able to recover it all through the scheme due to the constraints on the scheme criteria. And below that table, you'll see there is some narrative to support it. Confirmation of the arts is probably going to be about 300,000 short overall although there is some recovery grant, which has been identified through an application, which is around 100,000, but that in itself won't be enough to compensate us for the income losses that we'll see. And over the page, Grantham Car Parks, we're expecting a 60% income level against budget, which obviously, again, will be quite a significant shortfall if that continues for the rest of the year. But clearly, with the announcements made yesterday, then there may be an uptick in usage. This is, again, where the COVID reserve will start to play its part, because that will need to absorb where we're falling short of our income budget projections. And then finally, we're 21,000 short on all the markets due to the obvious trading restrictions and the inability to have full stores put out for the users of the sites. In terms of capital, obviously there's been a big amendment to the budget framework from the one approved by council. So council approved a budget of just over 4 million. That has now been increased to 8.6, and the amendments are listed in table 4. The strategic land acquisition, the decarbonisation scheme, the Salix funding, and also some additional DFG grant monies, 115. So that's increased the budget overall to 8.6, and our spend to date is just over 3 million. The lion's share of that spend being the purchase of the site at Turnpike Close for the new location of the depot. HRA, 1.7 million carry forward. Again, a lion's share of that being the stock condition survey, 780,000 works, which although were commissioned during last financial year, the actual spend of that will be taking place in this financial year, hence the need to carry that budget over. And in terms of the capital programme, slightly less carryovers. The Green Home grant that members will be aware of was carried across. So a budget of 23.8 million for the HRA. Spent today only at 534,000. So no doubt there'll be a view as to whether that 23 million is going to be achieved. But I think Councillor Reid sat here last time and said there was a deliberate pausing of the new build pending the stock condition survey findings to see whether the allocation of the finances need to be driven more towards the findings of the stock condition survey rather than continue with the new build. But we'll wait and see on that. But clearly there's a slight disconnect between the size of the budget and the actual spend to date. We've included cash flow modelling. As my members were very keen to be reassured that our cash flow remains positive. Clearly, we're not seeing the levels of volatility that we saw in last year's cash flow, and that's endorsed by the fact that our collection rates remain positive and strong. And you can see in terms of comparison where we should be at this point in the year to a large extent. Although business rates is incredibly volatile because the reliefs, which were 100% during this period, have subsequently been reduced down. So we've now introduced business rate payers back into the system that wouldn't have been paying rates for probably 15 months. So we expect to see some difficulties around collection for some of those business rate payers who haven't been in the habit of making business rate payments for quite a period of time. That's the highlight. Just mentioned as well, there is a finance risk register that we will continue to provide you with, and again to provide you a reassurance that in terms of financial framework overall, then we're closely monitoring any volatility. But compared to where we were sat a year ago, then it's fair to say it's a more stable environment than we've had for a long period of time. So I'll leave it there and open to questions. Thank you.
Councillor Ashley Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. The biggest gap, I think, or my biggest worry about the figures that are in front of me is the lack of action on the HRA capital programme. At the last meeting, you discussed the outturn from last year where we managed to not spend £13 million out of the budget of £17 million. So massive underspend on the housing capital programme. And so far this year, I think we've achieved either no houses or almost no houses. So nothing has happened, with virtually nothing in the pipeline, maybe one planning permission. I mean, if anything is missing from the risk register, I would say it's the risk of not doing anything. We went on a course lately in, I think it was called Financial Management for Local Government or similar. And the trainer said the one sure way to ensure you save money is by not doing anything. If we don't build any houses, we'll have lots of money in the bank, but that's not necessarily a good outcome for the council nor for its residents. So question one, which is probably more for the cabinet member than for the officers, why aren't we building any houses? And should we put on the register either apathy or risk of circumstances culminating in us not being able to build any houses this financial year, just as we didn't last year? And then my next comment would be about the leisure programme. Can someone point me within this report where either the leisure maintenance programme or the leisure transformation programme appears? Because we have these promised improvements to leisure centres and a new leisure centre in the Deepings, but I can't see where that shows up, nor can I see maintenance of the existing leisure centres of the scale that we need when there is water dripping in through the roof of the Deepings Leisure Centre. And finally, St Martin's Park. Can someone point me within this report where the progress, whether that's an income or an expenditure or a ongoing budget, where is St Martin's Park in this report? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take those separately. Councillor Adam Stokes.
Yeah, I'll take the first one. I mean, I think the Section 151 officer was pretty clear on what Councillor Reid said at the last meeting, but I will reiterate it because obviously Councillor Baxter has made the point again that Councillor Reid and the housing team are waiting for the stock condition survey before committing any more money to new housing, which is a very sensible way of utilising the budget, because until we know what the current condition of the current houses is, we need to ensure that we have the money in the reserves to pay for the potential refurbishment of those properties. And I think that's a very sensible way that Councillor Reid is approaching that situation.
Can I ask, when will the stock condition survey report?
I believe it's October, Mr. Chairman.
Or when it starts or when it
Finishes.
Okay, I think it is an issue that's been raised in this committee several times. I think this committee would benefit from adding it to the work programme after that, in Q4, after the stock condition survey is in.
Can I come back on that though, Chairman? In what context? Because obviously rural and communities have the housing area within their area to look at. I mean, what context would you be looking at on the financial aspect?
Yeah, from the financial aspect, I think Mark and I will work with the cabinet member. That the last thing we want to do is overlap. And on the other 2 points, the leisure programme and St Martin's Park, Richard.
Yeah, I can take those. I mean, my kind of contribution towards the new build comment is that actually there is a financial implication, and it's not necessarily good news not to build, because actually, as we know, we're selling on average 60 houses a year under right to buy, and the HRA 30-year business plan is predicated on replenishing stock, because clearly if we've got costs, a very resilient cost base that's going nowhere, but we've got reducing income, then that ultimately is to the detriment of the HRA. So there is a need and an impetus to replenish stock going forward. So yes, that money's sat in the bank, but actually it's not earning us anything, and it is committed in that way. So there is an implication, but I mean, yeah, well, I take the point, and the reasons being given why there is a slight pause, but I don't think it's unreasonable for the committee to see the pipeline of the new build programme, which I know is in existence. So for members to have closer scrutiny and understand it, because as I say, at the moment, it feels like it's relatively opaque without clarity of when new builds will start. But there is a programme, but it's whether members are assured that it's working in the timelines that they deem to be appropriate. In terms of maintenance, the kind of maintenance that Councillor Baxter is referring to is revenue maintenance. There are revenue maintenance budgets within the budget framework each year, because obviously we've got a large property portfolio. There's also a property reserve at this point in time, because this is only reporting on actuals to date. There is no pressure being borne through the system to suggests to us those budgets that have been allocated are not sufficient to meet the needs. I can't comment on deeping specifically, but maintenance budgets are bread and butter budgets that you'd expect to see in our overall budget framework. So those figures are available and will be committed to where those priorities lie. And similarly for St Martin's Park, as members know, it's going through a planning process at the moment. I think we talked about it at the last meeting as part of the performance report. Again, there's no pressure being from a financial position coming through, which makes us need to comment on it. Council had previously agreed that the regeneration reserve would be the primary source of funding for that project, and that continues to be at a level that is sufficient to meet the deliverability of the project in overall terms. So again, this commentary is silent on it because we're not seeing any particular concerns or issues with that project per se. And then just finally, just to make the point, the risk register attached is a financed risk register. It's not around projects and the inability or otherwise to deliver projects. So it will be silent on particular things around new build or deep in low centre or any other particular hotspots at the moment, because it is about the financial overall position of the authority, not specifics within it.
Councillor Baxter, if you want to come back on that.
Thank you. Yes, I agree that, I mean, the reason why we're in this stock condition survey, I don't want to call it a crisis, but difficulty at the moment is because we haven't done any for the last decade or so, and we're catching up. And we knew that we would be in that position when we were setting the budgets for this year. Besides that, the stock condition doesn't explain why we haven't got planning permissions going in for new houses. We know we're going to build those new houses. The evidence of progress, so there's a lack of evidence of progress. On the leisure programme, great that there's money in the budget for maintenance. I don't know if this is the right meeting to say it, but it is unacceptable that the sports hall and the swimming pool of any leisure centre should have water coming in through the roof. And if we're saying, oh, we haven't spent much of that budget yet, then I'd say get on and spend it and put things right for the people who are using our facilities. I didn't really understand the St Martin's Park comment. I did understand the finance risk register. So this risk register is about finance. Is it governance and audit then where we raise our concerns about the lack of, so somewhere the council must have a risk register which says there's a risk that we're not going to do all these things that we've promised. I'm not sure whether I should look at Councillor Stokes Senior to say that's where that risk is catalogued and assure us that it is.
Councillor Ian Stokes, do you want to reply?
Yes, don't know what Councillor Baxter's talking about. We're talking about the financial update report, April, May 2021. What he's referring to has got absolutely nothing to do with what's on the table at the moment. And can we get back to discussing what is there?
Okay, well, I'm grateful for your observations, and it's informed our work programme, which we'll take separately to this. Councillor Charmaine Morgan.
Thank you. Actually, thank you, Councillor Baxter, who raised certainly an area I wanted to home in on. In our action plan minuted for the previous meeting, I noticed that we are looking at monitoring the progress of affordable housing. I think we should be alongside that and always included also separately monitoring social housing delivery, in other words, our housing delivery. Then we won't be losing sight of that progress. I think that should be an important part of what's delivered to this committee, because it's such an important part of the function of our council and has such an impact on our residents. And being selfish, also my casework, actually I have to say that's one of the biggest areas. Housing comes up repeatedly. So I'd like to put that forward, please, as a proposal. The second area I have, I would have expanded more on that, but I think we've already had a lot of information around where we are at the moment. I support Councillor Baxter's comments, though, that we really do need to be pushing now to start building more social housing? And I think also, is it going in the places where it's most needed? Is another separate question to be had. If I can then focus on the car parks, on the car parks, I am aware, obviously, we've had a lot of issues with the general economy hit by COVID, etc. But I'm picking up there's possibly another issue emerging around them, especially in Grantham. And that is that there was a review done and price changes made to the parking fees. And Welham Street Car Park is in particular one that's coming up. And I noticed looking at social media, dare I use that as a barometer of what's going on, or a gauge, there are an awful lot of people commenting that they're no longer parking in our pay-for car park there because of the new changes in the fees, which they consider to be unreasonable. So they're using the free car parks they can use in the competing supermarkets, etc., which are available. So what I would like to ask is any work going on to see what the impact has been of the fee changes? I know it's difficult potentially to sort the wheat from the chaff here, but have we done any separate work to gauge what the impact is of those charges on demand now and use of those car parks?
Councillor Adam Stokes.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I know that Councillor Dr. Peter Mosley and his team are regularly doing work on that, so it will be a question for him on, because of that's within his portfolio. But him and Gary Smith do regularly check things like that.
Councillor Rice.
As a point of information, we have all been invited to a secret briefing about car park reviews next week. So we members might be able to find out something about that, even if the public can't. Thank you.
Parking is in our work programme, so I think that a report will be coming back to us on that. We have discussed it in previous meetings, so we are expecting a further report on that. Councillor Philip Knowles.
Thank you, Chair. With greatest respect to Councillor Stoke, Ian Stoke, sometimes what isn't in some numbers is as important as some of the numbers that are there, because they reveal a lot more, and this may be one of the cases. It appears to me that the Cabinet Member for Housing, it was last year when he started to say that the critical nature of the housing survey would put a hold on building, but the implication certainly was that the building would start in the last financial year and be gathering progress in this financial year, and that at the moment doesn't seem to be the case. At the last rural meeting, he was talking about a limited number of houses that were starting, and Bourne there's half a dozen in Bourne amongst them, but nothing like the sort of implication that there was that we'd be galloping along now to catch up with the housing failure of last year.
I'm grateful for the observations about housing, and the point has already been made that there's a £20 million plus budget to be employed. And I think that there needs to be a conversation with ourselves and communities about how we scrutinise that from a finance perspective as well as from a community's perspective. But I do envisage a report coming back to us, because spending £20 million needs to be done carefully and with the appropriate scrutiny. And as the year runs out, you don't want people spending all of that money in the last few weeks and things. That needs to be spent in a controlled manner. So we'll take those observations away and ensure the report comes back to us in the timeline that's already been outlined. Councillor Mark Whittington.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just confirm, Mr. Chairman, you did ask me to have a quick look at the work programme. I thought car parking was on our work programme. It does seem to have dropped off. So what I've done is, because under the work programme, committee members, there are a large number of scheduled items. And what we were hoping to do today was to go through those and try to start scheduling even some of those into our work programme. So I've added car parking to that, and also the report around the financial impact of the HMO capital and the house building scheme, and also to the item delivery of affordable housing in the district, which is an unscheduled item. I've added social housing to that, whether or not that comes as a separate report or as a separate part of the same report. But so I think that if that's okay with members, we can discuss that when we come to the work programme. My comments on the report so far. Obviously, Richard, thanks for the report. I know it's very early in the day at the moment, and I know you've referred to a number of sort of potential pressures that are still in the system, around COVID and the long tail, which has been used as a term because we don't quite know how long these impacts are going to be until they sort of, tail off, as it were. I know there's £1.2 million in reserve, and also, potentially already this morning, Councillor Morgan has raised one particular area where potentially some of that extra 1.2 million may need to go to support the council top-up scheme. But I'm just wondering if potentially going forward for future reports, would it be possible for you and the team to kind of look at commitments that are coming through against that 1.2 million reserves, so we can kind of know as stuff is coming through, how much has been allocated to support the budgets and what's left? Because obviously last year for us, I think the crucial thing was cash flow, because of the sheer volatility in terms of the amount of cash coming through the system, and the cash flow statements we got last year were really very useful. And I would still obviously like to see those included going forward. But if we could have just another appendix added to that around that 1.2 million and how it's been allocated, I think that'll be really, really useful for the committee to sort of monitor that going forward. And my final point is around the acquisition of the former Fenland site. Really pleased to see that that's been funded via internal borrowing, which I think is really, really useful. But apart from that, I accept the fact that obviously far too soon in the financial year to do any financial forecasting. But I think as we discussed earlier, I did have a brief chat with Richard earlier. Certainly the next report that comes to this committee in September will have all of the Q1 figures in there, all the budgets in there, forecasting. So I think there'll be a far more complete report, as it were. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thanks for those observations. Councillor Jackie Smith.
Yes, Chairman. We've got car parking information here to an extent, but when does that operate from? Does it include the increases of parking costs? And does it also include the costs of the addition of the charging points for the electric cars that are in there? And has that made any positive or negative, major changes to people's habits of using the car park? Are they put off by the costs for the electric points as well?
Richard?
The information in the report is only on the gross income from the car park, so any operational costs of the car parks themselves are not contained in that table. That's only the gross income from the fees and charges from the pay and display machines themselves. The electric charging points, I believe there's 4 in Welham Street. We've seen no adverse impact of those being in place in terms of the income projections. We still have the mind that the income projection shortfall is primarily driven by underutilisation of all the sites generally, because the volumes of traffic coming into the towns are not at the levels that we'd seen previously. So we're not seeing any adverse implications from those 4 spaces being dedicated to electric charging points.
So we'll see more of the detail when we take the report on parking. But just to clarify, that I think with the first point that Councillor Smith made, did the changes in the parking charges, did they come in the first day of the financial year?
1st of April, the new charges were introduced, yes.
Thank you for that. I'd like to make some progress. Are there any other comments and questions about this report? Okay, great. I'd like to move on then to the progress on the new complaints procedure. Councillor Linda Wooden, you're going to introduce this, is this right? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Sadly, the Deputy Chief Executive isn't with us this morning. So basically, I hope that you've read the report. I've got nothing much to add, only to say that the system that we're using at the moment is not fit for purpose. And if we follow what the housing are going to do and have a two-tier stage system, I think it would be much more accountable. At the moment, 2 officers have been overseeing complaints and there's no proper system in place. So I think this would be for the best. And other than that, I believe Debbie wants to pick up something with you as well. Thank you, Chairman.
Debbie Roberts.
Thank you, Chairman. It was just to run through the report and the recommendations just quickly. So obviously the background of the report is that the council's operated the feedback system since 2013. If we just go on to 1.22, there's been some risks that have been identified with using the current software system, and these are the areas that we'd like to address really. So at last week's cabinet, they approved the housing feedback policy, which means that they now have to follow a 2-stage process. So for consistency across the council, we would like to approve to look at a new software or a system that incorporates using complaints and managing complaints in the same way. Attached to the document is a project initiation document, which comes nice to the recommendations. So we would like the committee today to support the progression of the implementation to a 2-stage complaints process. And we'd like to work with the Deputy Chief Executive and the portfolio holder for corporate governance to commence the project.
Okay, are there any questions in the room? Councillor Ashley Baxter.
A quick question, and I reserve my right to ask another one later on. But why? We've just said that housing goes to rural and communities. Why are we talking about a housing complaints process here?
Sorry, this is corporate services part of the remit. The corporate services part of the remit of this committee. Okay, Councillor Philip Knowles.
Thank you, Chair. At the last meeting when this came up, I may recall a sort of brief conversation with Councillor Reid. And I was saying about this, that the important thing at the end of the day, you put a system in, you can fill in forms, you can tick boxes, you do everything else like that. But at the end of the day, it's the communication that is important. When people feel aggrieved when they don't get the communication they feel in order to satisfy or not to satisfy a complaint. And it's the sort of casual complaint that people feel very strongly about. They ring up SKDC, they don't get an answer, they don't get put through to where they might want to be, and the complaint isn't registered as such, it just lies as a trouble for residents. Has that happened to me in since our last meeting? And even the one I would discuss with when Councillor Reid was here before, we were working together on it, and it took another 10 days before anybody communicated with the lady with the bit of a grievance, and a very nice lady indeed, and it was a simple thing, but it didn't get communicated. Subsequently, when I came back to the council and tried to get through to people about some of these things, the workings of the telephone exchange and being able to put through just didn't work. And again, I was given the name of somebody who would contact me. That person did ring once and I was out. So as soon as I took the message, I rang back and they were out. And I left a message to say I was wrong. I've not heard a thing since. It's 10 days ago. So again, it's the communication with people that will get our residents more satisfied with what we do as a council, rather than necessarily being able to fill and tick a lot of boxes and say we dealt with that within 2 weeks and we filled in a box there and we got complaints satisfied at the end of the day and we can tick a box. And communication is critical to this, and it doesn't seem to be at its best at SKDC from my experience just at the moment. Thank you.
Councillor Charmaine Morgan.
Yeah, thank you. I know I actually raised some time ago the need for us to have much better information regarding complaints in our high-level reports, and also where the complaint areas were, so we can understand where the issues are, and how we then look at the resolution of those. and timeframes. I think a point's been made regarding communication, which is very important, but I think the key thing at the end of the day is that if we recognise there is an issue around a certain area through the complaint process, that should actually instigate change and improvement. And in the future, I think we mentioned on here improvement to service, but that we need to have very clear audit trail for that, and it needs to be consistent across all of the functions of the council as well, not just some departments. And I have, from my own experience, I support Councillor Knowles' comment about communication. I've raised complaints and heard absolutely nothing back at all, and I've had to chase sometimes even with more senior specialised departments. So what I would say is the reporting process here is extremely important, and the visibility of that to this committee, and also how then that is converted into, where necessary, sometimes it won't be, it might just be an operational issue, but when necessary, where that then converts into changes within the way that we do things. And I'd just like to kind of understand that cycle and have the assurance that this will apply to all of our departments as well. If I could go back to our presenters on that.
Councillor Norton.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for both of those questions. Excellent questions. Communication, in my book, is key, and this is something that we really need to look at. And Councillor Morgan, you're absolutely correct. You've obviously read this, you understand it, you realise the problems, things that have been going wrong, and we need to put it right. I actually believe in the personal touch, and when people ring into customer services, that should be given to the right officers, and those complaints should be followed up. And hopefully this is where we're going to get to. It isn't good enough. It is broken, and we must fix it. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Ian Stokes.
Yes, I consider that this complaints procedure is long overdue. We have had plenty of trouble in the past with the heating system, whereby you have to complain direct to the heating company rather than the council, who know nothing at that stage is being wrong. And I maintain that that was a wrong system at that time. I'm now concerned that how are these complaints logged? Is a verbal telephone conversation going to be accepted as a formal complaint, or has it got to be in writing before the complaints procedure starts? Because I think if somebody's unhappy on the telephone, and I agree with Councillor Knowles, getting through to the department is a nightmare. And if you get through and you want to make a formal complaint at that stage, then I believe that it should be accepted. Although I can't see anywhere within this report that that will be the case.
Sorry, are you talking about the existing system or the proposed system, Councillor Ian Stokes? The proposed system. Debbie.
With the existing and the proposed, phone calls and complaints via customer services are all logged currently. Most of our complaints do come through via the telephone currently and are logged in that way, but we do obviously accept emails, letters, face-to-face correspondence as well.
Councillor David Bellamy.
Well, the only thing I was going to if you make a complaint, really, you should get a reference number so that it can be referred back to, and any issues relating to that referred back to. So, because like in my personal experience, well, mainly through on housing, like I say, it does seem to go into a bottomless pit. And if you haven't got, I always email, so I've got my own records. But obviously that doesn't apply to all the residents. So
that point's noted. Can I just ask you to respond to one of Councillor Morgan's points? That the scope, Councillor Morgan asked, is the scope of this just housing, or is it broader than housing?
it's broader, so it needs to incorporate the whole of complaints across the whole council. So it has been prompted obviously by the speed in which we need to initiate a system for housing, but we need to have a one system across the whole authority. So it would be then used for housing, and Councillor Bellman is correct that at the moment the system that's used isn't actually a proper complaint software system. So you're right, you should get a log and a confirmation that you've submitted a complaint through, but that wasn't the initial scope for that piece of software. We've custom fit it to try and make it do that, but obviously that's part of the scope for the new piece of software, that it will do auto generation for that.
Councillor Mark Whittington.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just a question really for Debbie. In terms of complaints, I mean, presumably at the moment, the present scheme relates to complaints that become formal complaints. I'm just wondering, if somebody contacts the council, they may be a bit upset or concerned about a service or something, but unless they actually say, I want to complain about this, I'm guessing it's not going to be recorded, because you might have a situation where somebody's got a lot of concerns, may think they've been pushed around from pillar to post a bit, and actually are not happy with the system. But I'm guessing that unless they actually say or write the magic words, I want to make official complaints about this. So I'm just wondering, do we know what sort of level of complaints we got at the moment in terms of the overall number of people who aren't happy? And I know that's potentially going to be quite difficult for you, because there's a whole difference between somebody being unhappy on a phone or via a letter, and then actually saying, "Can I make this official?" So just round up. That'll be my first point, Mr. Chairman. But I'd like to come back a little bit later at the end as well. Thank you.
We'll take a couple of comments and a couple of observations. Councillor Baxter.
Thank you. Where currently do we scrutinise the complaints figures? Which committee of the council receives the number of complaints that have been made? Where do we know how many comments have been offered to the council? Where, please tell me where I can scrutinise the amount of time that you have to wait when you phone the 40, 50, 60 number, if that's the right number I'm phoning. Because sometimes you'll get a relatively brief, but more often you'll be waiting for, I mean, I've waited a quarter of an hour before anyone's answered the phone. That's something I would like to scrutinise, but I don't know where. I would like a direct answer as to how many complaints did we receive last year, or the average of the last 3 years? And if possible, can they be split by stage 1, stage 2 and stage 3 complaints? I know how many go to the Ombudsman, because that does arrive at governance and audit, but governance and audit doesn't cover how many people were kind of diverted from the Ombudsman by the response of the council. When does a stage, it's been asked earlier, but it needs answering properly, I think. If somebody phones the council to complain about something, that's not necessarily a complaint. What you said earlier suggested that if somebody phones to complain, then we record that as a phone call, but that's not a stage 1 complaint, is it? So, for example, at the weekend, I complained about a fridge in a dike, a fly tipping incident, but I'm not complaining to the that's not a council complaint. That's me reporting a fridge in a dike. In 3 weeks' time, if the same fridge is still there, then certainly I would like to complain to the council, and I'd like that recorded as a complaint. I don't know how the people that answer the phone know the difference between somebody complaining about fly tipping and somebody complaining about the lack of action on fly tipping. It's mentioned in the report about a software upgrade. Haven't we just agreed a significant upgrade to the software of the housing team? And if so, does the new upgraded software, upgraded after 8 years of a wobbly system, does the new one offer the capacity to do whatever it is we're asking to do within the housing context here. And finally, there's mention in here of corporate customer feedback. What's the difference between corporate customer feedback and the complaints process? Sorry, it's a list, but that's how it is.
Thank you. Debbie, can you respond to those points, please?
I'll try. 1.6 in the report, Councillor Baxter talks about comments. And this is the area where it's maybe not a complaint that people are letting us know, but we do currently say in there that we were applying 15 working days to those. So that's down to the person that receives that call to work out whether it's a comment or a complaint. So we do currently have the feedback process is for compliments, comments and complaints. I think sometimes the differential gets lost between maybe perhaps some services on what's a compliment or what's a complaint or what's a comment. So there is perhaps some lack of clarity that we need to do with the new system around the terminology to make sure that all services are dealing with those in the same way. Regarding figures, so currently underperformance reports are kind of coming to the OSCs on a regular basis. So I do believe that the performance was discussed and there was some figures in there around complaints that went last month. To the different OSCs have got their own work plans and areas that they scrutinise, and there are some areas in those that we need to look at. We're aware that we need to kind of review those and how they get reported to each of the OSCs, but currently each work programme is broken down obviously into those areas and there are performance measures in those.
Okay, are there any other comments in?
Sorry, Chair. The bits that haven't been answered include the software upgrade. We've just spent a fortune on an upgrade to our wobbly housing software. Is that not capable of doing some of this? And do you have a figure on the number of stage 1 complaints, formal complaints that were received either last year or an average of the last 3 years?
Thank you for that. Debbie?
I'll have to take that one away to get those figures. If I'm happy for that to be an action for me to come back with those answers for you.
On the figures, that's fine. They do exist, although I think that this committee has requested before that they be broken down because it's just a large, unwieldy figure. Can you comment on the software upgrade, why there's a multiple software upgrade in such a short period of time?
Councillor Baxter, are you referring to the rant and rave system, that the housing system, the feedback, or are you referring to the actual management system that housing are implementing?
I believe it's the CRM system for housing. So it's the big almighty system that manages housing. I can't remember what the name of it is, but I mean, it's been mentioned.
Debbie, can you comment on the CRM system there? Is this?
It's something that we can certainly look at to see, because that CRM system will have all of the information and all of the data from housing. But obviously it's whether we can use that same system across the whole of the council to implement complaints from other areas. But that will have all of the data on kind of all the empty homes and things like that. So we'll be able to use that data much more coherently going forward. It's just whether we can use that as a complaint system across the rest of the council. But it's certainly something that we'll take away and look at. We haven't started exploring those different packages yet.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to take a couple more comments. So, Councillor Morgan.
Thank you. First of all, an important stage in dealing with complaints is that you prioritise them, because a 15 working day response, for example, is something that's urgent. Councillor Baxter referred to potentially an example there. If it was blocking the river, for example, you might want to be dealing with that in minutes, not in 15 days. So the prioritisation process is almost as important actually as the complaint process itself, because it will drive the rest of the process. I would like to see, I think what's missing from here is an actual flow chart for us to look at a simple flow chart showing us what the procedure or process is for handling complaints used by everybody, basically. For back to communication, it's equally important. We all understand what that process is, whether we're members of the public or members of the council. That's just almost like a basic that we should have here. Now, I appreciate that we've got software issues, etc., but I would wear my former hat and say we could have a tactical solution, a strategic solution. The strategic solution is looking at our software and changing everything. That could take quite some considerable time. There are other very simple tactical solutions that could be implemented that would even a shared drive access or an Excel spreadsheet, for example, where the number or reference given is simply the next one on the line. When people access it. There are ways and means of doing this, and you can have different pages for worksheet pages for the different work areas. So, I mean, if you want to, like, I'm sure our IT team could knock something like that up in a matter of weeks, if not days. So there are ways and means of doing that. And the other thing is, I'd like to see a time frame around the actual delivery of this and target time frame as well. And last but not least, who is actually responsible for drafting the SOR, the Statement of Requirements for the complaint system? And can we have sight of that, please? Because that, I think, is actually quite a critical piece of work in the delivery of this solution. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'm going to take a couple more points, then we can comment on all of those. Councillor David Bellamy.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't know whether this is a forum to say this, but most of the issues that we discussed regarding complaints and that in a lot of industries would be treated as like quality issues, you know, like supermarkets or supermarket supply chain. I don't know whether Councillor Linda Wootton would want to look at accreditations, because very often, for instance, if there was an accreditation for local authority, it'd probably give you a framework to work within, and sort of also it sort of very often points towards best practice as well. I mean, if you do get an accreditation, you do get audited on it, but that at the end of the day, that's a good thing, because it just makes sure that you are sort of maintaining the quality.
Councillor Linda, do you want to respond to those comments, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Excuse me. I'll have a go at a couple of them, and anything that I missed, Debbie will pick up. I think you've had some excellent feedback here for us, some really great ideas. The time frame I think we need to set in answer to who's dealing with this. It's the Deputy Chief Executive, which is Alan Robertson, and I don't think we've purchased the software as yet, Debbie. So it's in its early stages, and this feedback has been excellent for me personally. And I will take these back and discuss this with Alan and his team. And Debbie, if you'd like to pick up anything that I haven't addressed. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to say that we can definitely include that flow diagram when we look at the new policy. It's certainly something that housing have done. So on the last page of the housing policy, they've got a whole flow diagram for the complaints process. It's quite easy to look at. So that's certainly something that if you wanted to have a look at that one, that went as well, and that's really useful. Certainly something that we will look to include as well going forward. Thank you.
Councillor Mark Whittington.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm really grateful. I think there's been some points made by everybody here. I'm looking at the action process ready for us today, which was to really, in effect, agree the project initiation document going forward on pages 27 and 28. And I'm picking up issues around the flow chart, and people have mentioned how do we prioritise time frame if there's accreditation schemes out there. I would like to add, how do we make sure that all the information about background complaints has been audited so we've not missed anything? And I'm just wondering if a lot of this if possible, Debbie, to go away and build these into a revised project initiation document. I think that would be really, really quite useful, actually, just so all these points that made today can be encapsulated in the revised PID. What the PID does refer to is right at the bottom of page 27 is project sponsor. It's under the dependencies and assumptions. It's for project sponsor to report to FEDCO progress to ensure process. And I know, Debbie, we had a brief chat earlier about if it would be possible for you or somebody to bring an update back to us at our September meeting. And at that point, if as part of that, because I did sort of refer to maybe just a couple of sides of A4, just how it was going and whatever, because obviously the crucial thing for you is to get the go-ahead to start the project, which I think we need to agree to today. I'm just wondering, rest of the committee, if as part of that on the 7th of September, if a revised PID coming to us that builds in all these points that we've made might be really quite useful, because obviously it's an outline at the moment. I think we've all made some very valuable comments around it that possibly should be incorporated within it, and then come back so we can review it again on 7th of September. But in the meantime, tell the team to start and kick the process off. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. I've got some comments to add as well. Well, congratulations to Alan for not pulling his punches here. This is quite a damning document, actually. Very worrying read, by the way. Just some of the comments that I underlined. Officers do not know how to escalate complaints. There's a lack of training in complaint handling. The system doesn't encourage ownership of complaints. There's a lack of data, lack of lessons learned, not fit for purpose. Complaints at each stage have not been effectively established. We are defenseless against vexatious complaints. A very damning report this is. It's a great hatchet job on the existing system by Alan, who's not with us here today. So that begs a couple of questions for me. First of all, how worried should we be about today's complaints handling process? I mean, are there vulnerable people out there today trying to make complaints today about problems that are today, that we have all these complaints? I mean, it sounds to me that this is a very high priority. How worried should we be about complainants today failing to receive their to have their complaints issued? And my second point is, as I say, I welcome the project initiation document. There's a bit more detail to add today. The thing that jumped out to me is the timing. This is going to be fully delivered by the end of 2021. Now, I think I know what fully delivered means, but can you just tell me what you think fully delivered means on January the 1st? What's the system going to look like, behave like, and how's it going to be on? How are all these points going to be addressed? What's it going to look like January the 1st? Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the committee for the report. Yeah, it's very honest.
Sorry, does somebody have the microphone on somewhere? Sorry, do you want to try again?
Yeah. We were completely open and honest in the report and identified the issues that we've got. Yes, we do have some people that are serial members in making complaints. So this is something that has come forward, but I think what we need to do is try and find a solution to this as soon as we possibly can. So for me, by the 1st of January, I would like to have a software system that's implemented and do some training around how we manage complaints between officers and members around the whole process. There is going to be a huge ongoing training with any new system in trying to implement it quite quickly. But we are aware that kind of currently we do need to find something quite that's suitable, fit for purpose, and meets the needs of residents as well as people going forward.
And to my first point, so you're confident that these points will be addressed come January the 1st. To my first point, is there a senior officer who is stepping in the short term to ensure that, you know, the vulnerable resident sat there trying to make a complaint that there's some added heightened observation about the weaknesses of some of our corporate processes here?
Yeah, the Deputy Chief Exec is fully on board and leading this whole process. So we're having discussions quite frequently, and this is something that we talk about regularly at our catch-ups. So the Deputy Chief Exec is leading this project.
That's great, Deputy Chief Exec, that's what I wanted to hear. Councillor Jackie Smith, please.
Yes, I think we must also remember that as councillors, we do get an awful lot of complaints to our home addresses. How do you deal with that if it's 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning and you get a phone call? You probably deal with it with yourself if you can. If not, you wait until Monday, by which time you probably have got one or two other problems to look after as well. And how do those bits of information finally get put into any sort of system to show how many we get? Because sometimes if there's something hot going on, I can get 7 or 8 calls on a Sunday morning. That's
an interesting observation. I do want some comments on that, but Councillor Charmaine Morgan, if you can add some more comments.
Thank you. I think some key players in this are actually the operational line managers as well, because frequently they will pick up what I call escalated issues. But I think that that within the process you picked up, well, how important is this? I'll give you an example of a case I've got involved with, extremely to the point that we could have had a death or deaths if it weren't for luck. Last January, one of my residents who was living in private rented accommodation reported issues with their gas boiler. They then subsequently contacted our environmental health team, who basically just bounced it back to them, didn't progress it with the relevant bodies, and it took until my involvement in the autumn. So a family was living in a building that had in effect been condemned, before actually we as a council finally intervened and actually did something. And that was only because I went to the very head of the department and I had to push for something to be done. So I think one of the areas, certainly I hope we're looking at, it's not just a day-to-day operational, but we're also including in that our enforcement team and how the enforcement teams respond, because they very often actually will be called in a key part in the process. But then linking to Jackie's point, the out of hours service should reflect where we've identified there is a need through the complaints process for that 24/7 cover. And I've noticed that's been reduced lately rather than increased. And that's an extremely important safety net for our council.
Okay, are there any other comments on this report? So if you, okay, there are no other comments. Oh, Councillor Phil Knowles, if you want to add some comments, then we'll get
very briefly, Chair. In determining how we measure quantity, the most important thing is the quality of what we do, and that is more difficult to measure. If you get 100 complaints and the target is to deal with 80 of them within 3 years, and you deal with it could be that the top 10 most important are the ones you push to the back of the queue in order to satisfy a particular thing. And in a working life, I've done that in the past, sort of not fulfill the objective, but fulfill the requirement, and been congratulated on it for, because it was a target of a number. So at the end of the day, communication and quality of what we do it's more difficult to measure, but it's just as important. It is vitally important. Sorry to bring it back, Chair.
Okay, so I think those points have been logged. The multiple sources of complaints, the quality, the classification of reports. If I can just add a recommendation that I think that the project initiation document should come back to this committee with some of the observations that we've outlined today. Are we all in agreement with that? Ideally in September, as soon as we next meet. Are there any other comments on this report? Okay, I don't think we need to vote on it. Okay, so I'd like to make some progress, please. Then let's move on. Item 9 is the work plan. What I suggest is that Mark and I meet to discuss the work plan, because some of these conversations need to happen with cabinet members. Are there any things that jump out to members of this committee that they would like to see prioritised? Councillor Whittington.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just on the work programme. Members of the committee will notice that the 7th of September meeting is currently has no items there. However, this morning we've agreed for the discussion paper on the Bourne special expense area to be added to that agenda. We've also agreed on an update back on the complaints process, which we've just agreed as well. And also, I was speaking to Richard earlier, the Q1 performance figures will be available as well for that meeting in September. So there are now 3 items on that particular agenda. Can I also just refer members back to the final page of well, it's actually on page 34, all of the unscheduled items. Now, in addition to those items there, I've added a further 2 to that list, which I mentioned earlier. One is the car parking report. One is to slightly change the delivery of affordable housing to include social housing. And the final one was the one that Councillor Baxter raised around the financial impact and issues around the council house building programme, social housing building programme. So, Mr. Chairman, there are a lot of items there that are still unscheduled. Now, I think maybe we do need to go away and work it through together, but I think we do need some guidance from members on items they think that are really essential. Thank you.
Councillor Morgan.
Well, I had a discussion with you earlier, and that's regarding the forthcoming changes to the policy, well, actually a new policy relating to scooters within these sheltered housing schemes that we're responsible for. And there are potential financial ramifications of those for the residents and obviously therefore for us as well. In fact, particularly for us, given the potential cost of implementing that scheme. So I'd like to see that on our work programme, please.
Okay, Councillor Adam Stokes.
Yeah, can I push back on that and say that's probably more of a communities issue? Because you could actually say that everything that goes to every other committee, because everything's got a financial impact, would come here, but I think that's more of a communities and rural scrutiny.
I'm keen not to overlap with other committees, but what I suggest we do is try and understand the scope of what Councillor Morgan's proposing and learn as to which committee that's appropriate. Are there any other comments? Councillor Ashley Baxter.
Thank you. Yes, there are a few bits which fall between the cracks, I believe. And I mean, I appreciate the comment that Councillor Adam Stokes has made, even though he's not a member of this committee. His contribution is welcome. Yeah, yes, you're a cabinet member, and this is a scrutiny.
Do you want to make your point, Councillor Baxter?
Yeah, I'm teasing, as he knows. The leisure programme, the delivery or lack of delivery of the transformation programme for leisure doesn't land anywhere at the moment. St Martin's Park currently comes here, but it comes as part of the review of the corporate plan. When we do the review of the corporate plan, we look at a large part of the corporate plan, and it's difficult to get into the detail of each individual item. So I think that one deserves a agenda item by itself. The University Centre Grantham, I don't think lands anywhere at the moment. And we've got it sitting there waiting to go. Where do we scrutinise that? Equally, the retail units within that building, the Savoy Cinema building, it may be a very short report of we've still got these retail units, we're still coming out of a pandemic, nothing's happened. But I'm not sure whether that's community or this one or wherever. The HRA programme, certainly I'd welcome it going somewhere. But maybe this is what your committee for is it the chair of chairs or the committee for the chairs of scrutiny groups is to address. I don't know how that works, but things like the leisure programme, the university centre, St Martin's Park, that can easily fall through the cracks. Your job as chairs of scrutiny groups is to make sure that nothing gets left behind. What should be coming here, almost as a standing agenda item, is the Future High Street Fund. We celebrated all this money we got earlier in the year. When are you going to talk about that again?
That's actually on the unscheduled items. But thank you for those points, and you're exactly right. The scrutiny chairs meet to discuss what's in our work programmes to make sure there's no overlap and to make sure, as you say, nothing falls between the gaps. Councillor Mark Whittington.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I think Councillor Baxter made some very valid points there about potential items that may sort of fall between the cracks, as he says, and maybe it is. I think it is incumbent upon us, Councillor Baxter, as chairs and vice chairs of the Scrutiny Committee, to sort of take this outside and at our meeting to sort of schedule these items on there and to discuss. And again, the issue that Councillor Morgan just raised around the schools and shelter housing, it's potentially one of these where maybe we need to discuss with the other chairs and vice chairs and determine where best they need to go. So I think we can do part of that. And actually as well, obviously at the moment I'm chairman of the Constitution Committee. We're doing a Constitution review, and as part of that, I'll be wanting to look at terms of reference of committees as well, just to make sure that we're not missing anything out. So I think those conversations will helpfully feed into that process as well. So I think that's something, Councillor Baxter, that we can take away and discuss, just to make sure that, as you say, there aren't any cracks. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And you've got Councillor Morgan.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments in the room about the work programme? Councillor Morgan.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to feedback, if I may, the comment made by Councillor Stokes, and that is that we're not just about finance. We've got 3 headings to our committee, and corporate services is one of them. And it's easy to, I think we are going to get overlaps. I think in some respects it might be unavoidable, because yes, there will be different aspects that the other committees look at. We will be coming at things potentially from a different angle, and should do. And bearing in mind also we have additional expertise, experience on this committee that we would be adding to the picture. The reason I'm suggesting we look at scooters is because potentially, having seen a draft report that is highly controversial potentially, and also is clearly a corporate service that we deliver overall, and it does have financial ramifications, actually potentially quite significant. But that is not the only subject I think we should look at. I'm just using that as an example.
We'll take that as a discussion outside of this meeting in a scoping document. Are there any other comments from the committee on our work programme? Councillor Linda Wotton.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to establish with Councillor Morgan whether she was talking about the sheltered housing scooters, which she's just established that she is, and that has been to the Rural and Communities Committee, like you had already suggested. Thank you, Chairman.
I think we take this discussion outside of this, because I think that there are different angles to this that are a longer conversation than we can have in this committee room. Councillor Mark Whittington.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. To kind of speed this up, obviously there are a lot of unscheduled items on there. I mean, I think that myself and the chairman do need to discuss them through and start to begin to identify some of these to go to specific meetings. It'd be quite useful if in the next sort of couple of days, the members of the committee could just drop us an email around the items that are currently on the work programme, just to give us some feedback in your views as to some kind of order that you'd like to see them. I mean, obviously we would then need to programme them in consultation with officers, but I'm very concerned. I mean, I'm very concerned when I see more than 3 or 4 unscheduled items on any work programme, because I know that in most meetings we can only realistically talk through 4 things maximum. Potentially we've got almost 3 extra meetings here in terms of stuff that possibly we may need to discuss. Now, one of the options potentially, Mr. Chair, might be that we may just need to hold an extra meeting of the committee at some point in order to work through some of this backlog. But I think that's a discussion that we need to have. But it also would be really useful, I think, to get feedback from the committee as well. Thank you.
I think that's something I've not ruled out. So if there are no further comments on the work programme, Councillor Morgan.
I pick up what Councillor Whittington said and come up with other comments, but we've got the Grantham Town Centre. I know that this has been something that has been of interest to you as well, Councillor Jill, for a long time, but I think it would be worth reflecting in here also the changes that LCC are proposing and the potential that we build that into this work. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Moving on to item 10, is there any other business in the room? There's no other business in the room. Therefore, it's 12:26, so I'm going to bring this meeting to a conclusion.